Okay, all right, moving on then. Our last module. Here we go. Okay, so we're going to talk about incrementally updating data caches with less cube maintenance. Actually, there are two ways now in Dynamic Cubes to handle lower latency and to get your data into your caches a lot faster. So last year we talked about the recent historic configuration where you split up your fact table into two parts. One that's a lot bigger with your historic sales that doesn't change very often or at all, and a smaller part of it with recent sales, maybe the current month of data that changes and gets updated maybe more often daily or intradaily. And the reason for doing this is so that because the historic sales information is a lot bigger and it doesn't actually change, you can keep the cube up and running for a lot longer, keep the caches going a lot longer, and aggregates warm and primed for a lot longer. And for the recent sales, every time there's an update, since the cube is really small, the refreshes for those cubes are a lot more palatable to handle, so that any query that goes up at the virtual cube at the sales level, since they are split amongst its constituent base cubes, performance is still as fast as it can be because your historic sales cube is already up and running, the caches are primed, they're warm, you haven't restarted it, you can still get those data points really fast, and the queries against the recent sales cube, since it's a lot smaller, very fast as well. So with those two, with this combination, you can still try to get lower latency, get that more recent data updated in the cube in the reports for your users a lot faster. But that's one way to do it. But that does require you splitting up your fact table into two parts: the historic section, larger historic section, and then a smaller recent sales one. Now, but if you didn't want to, split up your fact table into two parts, but actually keep it in one fact table, there's a problem about keeping your caches consistent, as well as keeping your caches primed and ready to go to help improve performance. So I'm going to show you a quick little animation here about if you only were to have just one fact data, one place where your warehouse data is and your database aggregates, how warehouse updates and caching consistency are handled today. So you may have your cube up and running, you have all your caches that we've talked about before, it's primed, it's ready to go, it's great. What we see with a lot of customers and how warehouse updates are done today, you have to stop your cube first. And stopping your cube prevents any new user queries from coming in against the server. And once the cube is stopped, then new data is funneled into the data warehouse and updating all the different fact and dimension tables and all that. And after that's done, aggregates or any summary tables that you might have in your database are then updated. And then once those steps are done in the underlying data warehouse, then you can restart your cube, and restarting your cube, loads the member cache. And once the member cache is loaded, the cube is started, is up and running. Then it loads the aggregate cache, pulling the new data out from the underlying data source, and user queries can then come in. It proceeds as usual. To really keep the caches, the fact table, the aggregate tables, and all that in sync, you really had to stop your cube before doing any changes to your data warehouse. But we have a new feature that's new in 10.2.1 6-Pack 3. That's 10.2.1 6-Pack 3, a new feature called Mirror Real-Time Updates. With Mirror Real-Time Updates, you can insert data into the fact and aggregate tables in your warehouse without having to stop the cube at all. That means all your queries that come from the cube will return consistent data as in the presence of any updates that are going on in your underlying fact table. And there's a new admin command where the dynamic cube can then consume any of these new inserted rows on the fly without having to stop that cube. And keep all your caches warm and primed and ready to go. You don't have to recreate them at all. So some of the benefits of this is that you can load your fact table updates outside any kind of regular maintenance window, and kind of reducing the time you need for any total regular maintenance. And the only real time you might want to actually stop your dynamic cube is when there are major updates or deletes or changes to the fact table or dimension tables. So how do we do this? Here's a quick glimpse at maybe you have an existing fact table and aggregate table here. What we do is we leverage the existence of another column in your fact table. So basically ask that you alter your fact table to add a nullable transaction ID or TID column. And we're going to use that TID column to identify any new rows that get added to the fact table. And let me show you another example here. You can insert these new rows into the fact table. Even when the cube is running, you'll see the new rows down at the bottom here with TID values that are non-null. New rows that are added to the fact table must adhere to certain rules, basically. Each new insert must have a TID value that is greater than any of the previous additions, and any single transaction, any of those rows that you have there, you might want to associate with the same TID value. So as you can see here, there were three updates that were done. One that inserted 2 rows with the TID value of 1. The second update that came through only inserted 1 row with the TID value of 2, and the third one came in with the TID value of 3. Now, we suggest you bulk load, and you likely would see more than just a couple here. You probably want to associate more, but this is all that could fit on the screen. So there's a little example here. But when you follow these rules, really you can insert new rows at any time. So the Dynamic Cube engine actually knows what the latest TID value it would report up to at any point in time. Any of these new rows that are added to the fact table, they aren't available or visible in the Dynamic Cube until you perform an incremental update, which is a new admin command, or the cube is restarted. So then, therefore, it guarantees that any queries that are run only get the data up to a certain TID value. Okay. So one thing to note here is that the aggregate table values, whatever is in the aggregate table, must correspond to any row, corresponds to all the rows where the TID value is null. Although you've added new rows into your fact table, you don't necessarily have to update the aggregate table at the same time. You can do this later. You can choose to do this at later maintenance updates, maybe weekly, or less frequently than your fact table updates are. What the Dynamic Cube does is when it runs queries, if it does want to include fact rows up to let's say TID 2, it would actually do a union query that includes the fact rows from an aggregate table as well as those additional rows from the fact row. So you will get the correct answers all the time. Let me show you a quick little animation now of how the cache maintenance would look when you enable your cube for incremental updates. Users' queries can still come in at any time. You don't have to stop your cube at any point. New data can still flow into your warehouse. And then at a later point in time, when you choose, you can issue a new cube command called Incrementally load, which will pull data from the warehouse, from the fact table, and update the corresponding values in your aggregate cache as well as your query data cache, and refresh the expression in the results at cache. That all automatically happens when you initiate an incremental load command. Let's get hands-on, and let me show you this in action a little bit. So 3 things I'm going to show you in the hands-on lab part of this. Well, 1, I'm going to show you how to enable your cube for new real-time updates and incremental loads. I'm going to show you how to add new fact data when the cube is running and show you that it has no effect on the values that are returned until you issue an incremental load, which I'll do. I'll show you how to update your aggregate tables. Like I said, you don't have to update your aggregate tables every time the fact table is updated. You can do it at a later point in time. I'll show you how to go through that. And I'm going to show you how to do all those same steps, but using the DCAdmin command line tool. Okay, so let's go back into Cube Designer. I'm going to open up a model real quick. Okay, so this is the model I'm opening up here is just the standard, sales cube that we've been working with, but we're going to point it against a different version of the sales fact table. This is a fact table with both the historic and the recent information put together in one fact table, and has that additional nullable TID column in it, and I'll show you how to model against that. One thing I will mention real quick before I forget is that the near real-time updates feature is limited only to new fact rows. So this will only identify new fact rows that are added to your fact table. So if you have any updated or deleted rows in your fact table, or you have any new updated or deleted rows in your dimension tables, then you'll have to restart your cube as you normally would to make sure that those updates do get propagated through. So only new fact rows can be identified and incorporated into the cube, into a running cube, without having to stop your cube for incremental updates. Let me open up the model. I'm calling this cube sales NRT. NRT is just my own internal name to kind of separate it. NRT for near real time. So just FYI, that's why I called it that. You can call it whatever you want, but for this lab, I'm just going to identify it with sales NRT. Okay, so double click on the cube to open it up, and you open up the implementation tab. Show you what it looks like real quick. I want to show you what the star schema looks like for this cube. Show you it looks exactly the same as all the historic sales and all the other sales cubes, just has a different fact table. As I mentioned, that fact table contains both historic sales and recent sales in one here. So, yep, basically the same cube. So sales NRT is the fact table that we'll be working with, but it does have all the same dimensions all the way around. Show you that on the left-hand side. And the sales NRT fact table does have the additional column, additional nullable TID or TID column. So what we're going to do to enable this cube for near real-time updates or incremental updates is to open up the cube. We're going to double-click on the measures folder, and by selecting the measures, go down here to the properties for the measures. You'll see a new property here called Transaction ID Column. So what we're going to do here is we're going to select what the TID or the Transaction ID column is. Here it is, TID. So for this new nullable column that you're adding to your fact table to hold the transaction information, it could be any data type, really. For best performance reasons, we suggest using a numeric data type, but it can really be any data type. You can use dates, you can use strings, you can use anything here. Basically, any data type where you can do a comparison against it, comparing one value to another, as well as any data type where you can do a max query on it. So you can find the maximum or the highest with the latest transaction. Okay, so in our case, we're using an integer TID. And like I said, you can use any data type. We suggest using big integers, so forth, because those numbers can get very large, and using numerics because they're easier to work with, or more performance in the underlying data sources. So as long as they're comparable, as well as a max function can be run against it, you're good to go. So that's really it. Just select the transaction ID column for your cube, and let's publish this cube. Okay, so it's starting the cube up. And in 10.2.1 6.3, when we introduced the incremental update or near real-time feature, the administration of the cube and the ability to invoke incremental updates was only available in the DCAdmin command line tool. New in 10.2.2, so this latest release 10.2.2, we have added those corresponding metrics, cube metrics, as well as the cube actions to the admin, to the Cognos Administration UI portal. So let me show you that real quick here. Okay, so for the sales NRT cube on the right-hand side, let me pull that down a little bit. You'll see a few new metrics here. I'll point out this one here, TID value of the latest increment. You'll see it's null because it's null right now, meaning that there are no new TID values in the fact table, and in which case I will. Let me run a quick database query just to show you what I'm talking about. Oops, there's going to be a lot of rows. Let me do it distinct. So selecting distinct TIDs from the sales NRT cube, they only have null TIDs at this point. So that's why this metric value for the TID value of latest increment is null. Let's take a look at another metric here. Time latest increment became available, and this is just right now. This indicates the date and time of the latest increment. Well, in this case, it's null, was ready for queries. You'll see this time change when we do invoke an incremental load action. And the last metric I'll show here is duration to build latest increment. We haven't built any increments, we just started the cube, so that's why this time here is 0. Okay, so let me run a quick report here, and after we run the report, I'm going to add some rows. And going to the sales NRT folder, I'm going to run the current sales by region report. Okay, so I'm going to run this report, and after I run this report, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add new rows into the fact table with the same TID value greater than the previous transaction ID, which was null, so I'm going to insert it with the TID value of 1, and they're all going to have the same one because it's all in the same transaction. That's what I want to do. All right, so take a quick look. These are the values currently as they are right now. So 67, let's just quickly remember America's is 671,483. Okay, 58. Let's go back. Now, I'm going to add some rows to the fact table, and I'm going to do that. I have some scripts ready here. I'm going to add stack rows with TID of 1. I'm going to double click on that. This is going to run a script in the background. And what this will do is add new rows to the fact table, all with a TID value of 1. And let me go to the, well, no, sorry, not that query because that's going to be a lot of rows. Distinct. I'm going to select distinct TIDs from sales NRT. Great. It now has some rows with TID value of 1. And just a real quick, I'm going to select TID values from the fact table where the TID is not null, or maybe greater than 0. And you see there's a bunch of rows with TID value of 1. Okay, so that ran successfully. Now let's go back into the admin. Just want to show you real quick the metrics. Nothing really changed here. I added rows to the fact table. We didn't do anything to the cube. You'll see that the latest increment is still null, okay, and that the aggregate table hit rate is 100%, meaning that query that one report that we just ran hit the aggregate table, right? As you notice that we added rows to the fact table, we did not update the aggregate table at all. So there's new rows in the fact table that don't quite correspond to everything that's in the summary table, but that's okay because, as we said before, all the values that are in the summary table correspond to rows in the fact table that have a null TID. Okay? All right, let's go back and run that report one more time. This came back really fast because we hit the results at cache. So it's the same number, 671,000. Let's drill into Americas. So this drill down should result in a query to the underlying database because it's lower than the fact table, it's lower than the aggregate table that we have, so it'll be a query against the fact table itself. And you can see here the values add up to what the Americas was. So 55 plus 24, it's like 200-ish, 280, or 290 plus about 680, 670. So it's in the same right ballpark, right? So you can see that the values here under America still correspond to the values of the fact values with the TID of null. But let's double check something real quick to make sure that I actually didn't do anything differently here in the metrics. I'll refresh that. Here you'll still see the TID value of the latest increment is still null, and the aggregate table hit rate is 50%. 50% because it did go down to the underlying database to get some information that it needed. Okay. All right, so let's quickly add some more rows to this fact table. I'm going to run this next script. We're going to add fact rows. We're going to add some with TID value of 2. Okay, so that ran. Let me do a quick SQL query. I'm going to select distinct TIDs. All right, so now it has both 1 and 2, a bunch of rows with 1 and 2. Let's incrementally update the data in the cube and the caches to the latest TID, which is 2. So as I mentioned before, after you started your dynamic cube and you've updated the fact table with new rows, the way to make them visible in the dynamic cube is to run an incremental load. Okay, you can load more than one increment at a time, meaning like in this case we have increments for TID 1 and increments for TID 2. You can load them all at once. You can do, I want to do both of them, 1 and 2. Alternatively, you can choose which TID, which updates to go to. So you can go, I only want to go up to TID value 1. I don't want to bring in TID value 2s just yet. But the only way to do that is in the DCAdmin command line tool, which I'll show you later in just a little bit. But in the Cognos administration, cube administration command to do incremental load, it'll do a max query against the underlying data source, against the underlying fact table, find out what the max highest TID value is, and load to that latest value. So in this case, it'll be to number 2. Okay. So let's go into our Cognos administration. So we have a cube here. Right click or single click to get the actions. And you'll see a new action here to incrementally update data. Okay. So I'm going to click on. So when I click on this action, like I said, what it does under the covers is it runs a max query to determine what the latest TID value is, and in this case it'll be 2, and identify all those new fact rows up to and including TID value 2, and update corresponding values in the cube's caches that it has. Okay, so that's done now. I'll refresh the metrics real fast, and you'll see here on the right-hand side of the metrics, the TID value for the latest increment is now 2. You'll see that the duration to build the latest increment is 3 seconds. So it took 3 seconds for it to query the database, find out what the latest TID value is, pull those new row values up, and update the caches that we have. Okay, and in the last, the time to latest increment became available is about a minute ago. So that's how you know that's when the last time the increment was updated. That's the point in time in which the data values are available. Okay, so let's run that report one more time. So we should see that these values now correspond to the latest TID value of 2. You can see that number is a lot bigger now. Instead of 671,000, it's 867,000. Okay, let's do a drill down into Americas again. Again, this will be a data cache hit because we drilled down to it before, but because we did the incremental update, its own cached values were updated in place without actually having to clear the cache or anything like that. We actually updated it in place, and you'll see the values now are, corresponds to TID value of 2, a little higher, or a lot higher, as the case may be. Okay, and as I mentioned before, when a query does include the aggregate table for any of these queries, and there are new real-time updates involved, in order to determine the correct value, what the query engine does is it first checks the fact table to see if there's any latest rows in there, and it combines that, does a union query, combines that with the result of what's in the aggregate table to make sure it has the combined correct result that returns back to you. Okay? All right, so let me go back and see the metrics real quick. You'll see that the data cache hit rate, let me refresh. Data cache hit rate now is 33%, meaning, well, it's up from 0, which it was before, meaning that it did use the data cache, and it did use the updated data cache, right? And it didn't require any queries down to the underlying database, which is cool. All right, so let's add some more rows into our fact table. I'm going to add a bunch now. I'm going to run, I'm going to add values for TID3, TID4, as well as TID5. Let me double click on that, run that script. That finished running, and okay. So as I mentioned before, you can still continue to add more rows to your fact table without having to update the aggregate table at the same time, whereas you already had to do it before without enabling incremental updates or new real time for your cube. So this really kind of reduces the need for all those frequent update cycles or longer update cycles for both the fact and the aggregate table. So you can choose to, I don't know, you might actually choose to never update your aggregate tables, or only really update the aggregate tables only when it's really necessary, when you feel like it. Okay, so let me show you what you would do when you want to update your aggregate tables or maintain your aggregate tables. So yeah, so as I mentioned before, you still get the correct answers because the queries are going to be a combination, a union query of both the aggregate table data as well as the new fact data that's in the fact table. But over time, some of those new rows, that union query can slow down because there might be a lot of new rows in the fact table. So to restore that performance, that really fast performance that you had before, you really should kind of update those aggregate tables then. When you want to update your aggregate tables, you have two options to do so. One option is to stop your cube, as you did before. Stop your cube, rebuild the aggregate tables, and then reset the transaction ID of the tick column in the fact table to null, and then restart the cube. But this requires a reload of all the data caches and everything, and this is only really necessary to stop the cube if you have other updates that you need to, get refreshed in the cube itself. Like maybe you have some cube model updates, or you have in-memory aggregates that changed, or you changed some cube properties or something like that. That's the only real reason why you might want to stop the cube and restart it, is to really get a refresh of everything. Alternatively, you can just pause the cube. And pausing is a new cube action that we introduced in 10.2.1 Fix Path 3. When you pause the cube continues to be up and running. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So pausing the cube keeps the dynamic cube up and running so that the caches and all that, they still are valid, and the cube is available, it's still in memory and all that, but it becomes unavailable for queries by report users, meaning even though the cube is up and running, you can't actually query on it. It's kind of in a hold pattern. It's paused, basically. So while it's paused, while the cube is paused, you can build your aggregates in the database in the background, reset that transaction ID column in the fact table to null, and then resume the cube you unpause it, and it'll keep on going with the caches as they are, already warm and primed, without having to reload them all the way from scratch again. So it gives you kind of the best of all worlds, keeping the caches as warm and filled and hot as possible without having to, go through the whole exercise of restarting the cube. But, like I said, sometimes you have to restart the cube to get some other updates. But if you don't require any of those other updates, like updates to your cube model or in-memory aggregates or properties or anything like that, you can just pause your cube. Okay? All right, so let's go through the steps to update your aggregate tables. So before updating any of your aggregate tables, we recommend that you run an incremental update or incremental load to a specific TID value. Okay, so then when you do update your aggregate tables, you want to update it to that same TID value. This really ensures that the maintenance of both the fact table and the aggregate tables in sync with each other, and you're not resetting any fact table rows to null that aren't actually corresponding or represented in the aggregate table itself. So it's more for consistency's sake. So what we're going to do here first is we're going to do an incremental load. Remember, we had just loaded TID values 3, 4, and 5 into the cube. So we're going to incrementally load and refresh here. And you'll see the latest TID value here is now 5. Okay, so 5, that's the latest, what's going on in there. So again, there's some rules here when we're updating our aggregate table. Any row with a null TID value must be included in all aggregate tables. So anything that's null TID in the fact table must be in the aggregate table. Any row with non-null TID value must not be in the aggregate table. So we're okay here since our fact table only is up to 5. But if you were to, constantly add new rows into your fact table, so let's say it goes up to 6 and 7 and 8 and 9, you want to ensure that, the fact table, when you do, after you update your aggregate table, the fact table rows that have null TID value are those that correspond to what the values are in the aggregate table itself. Okay? And we really suggest you don't update the aggregate table past any point that any running dynamic cube is at. So this running sales NRT cube is at TID value 5. We don't suggest you update your aggregate tables up to 6 or 7 or anything higher than 5 because that'll make things inconsistent. Okay? So the next thing after incrementally loading your cube to the latest TID value, and that's 5, is to pause it. So let's pause the cube here. Okay. And you'll see that the cube state here on the right-hand side is now paused. Okay. And it shows partially available here in the status. Let me run a quick query, that same query again, to show you that what would an end user see when the cube is paused. Remember when we said that when a cube is paused, it's unavailable for queries, and so the end user will get this error message, cube is paused and unavailable, please contact your administrator. Okay, so it's paused, so that's good. Now let's update the aggregate table. So again, remember this value for needs to be equal or less than the value of the last incremental load in the fact table, which is 5. So let's bring up, I have a script here to aggregate table update. We're going to update the aggregate table up to TID value 5. I'm going to show you what's in that script in a little bit. So that ran, what's in that script is something. So basically it's inserting additional rows into the aggregate table. And here's something to note. In the where clause, it only adds the new rows up to and including the TID value of the latest increment on the server, which is 5. So we want sales NRT TID values less than or equal to 5, and that are not null, because the null ones are already in the aggregate table, right? So that's what this script did. Okay. So now that we've updated the aggregate table with additional rows up to TID number 5, we will null out that TID value column for those corresponding rows. So we'll also update the fact table TID values for 1 through 5 to null. Run that script, and we'll take a quick look to see what's inside that script. What did we do? And basically what this did is it updated the fact table, sales enter T, setting the TID column to null where the TID is less than or equal to 5, because that was our latest increment value, and where it was not already null. Okay? So those two things are done. Our database updates are done. We've updated our aggregate table. We've updated our fact table now so that they're now in sync. They both correspond to each other. The aggregate table contains the values that correspond to null TID values in the fact table. So now we're going to resume our cube again. So we're going to take it out of pause by clicking on Start. Start resumes the cube and does not clear any of the caches or anything like that. It just opens it up to queries again. And it's important to note to click on Start and not Restart, because Restart will actually do a full stop. So we click on Start, which is good. It's a lot faster now. So let's click. You see the metrics. The cube state is in running state. And we didn't change anything. We just unpaused it, so the TID value is still 5 here. And let's go back and run that report. Now we should be able to run that report. And you see the values are a bit higher now. They are now at the TID value 5. Okay, so really that's it. That's really it in a nutshell. And so it's worth noting again, even after the cube is paused and you update your aggregate tables and all that stuff, all the future TIDs. Let me go back here and show you what's in the database table. Remember, we had nulled out all the TID values to null because we've updated our aggregate table. Now only null TID values are there. Even after we've done all that, any future TIDs, any future new rows that we add to the fact table still need to be greater than the previous TID value that was in there, which means when you resume adding new fact rows into this table, you'll start at 6. And basically that's all to maintain consistency throughout, what's in the running cube, because the running cube consists of 5 and so forth. So let me just run a quick script again here to update the TID value to 6. And show you what we have here. Okay, so yeah, so it's up to 6, and that's where we're going to continue off. So that's all it in a nutshell, how you would do all these commands using the UI in the Cognos Administration portal. I'm going to show you the same thing, but using the DCAdmin command line tool. And this command line tool is new in 10.2.1 FP3. And the UI commands, or UI, being able to do the same things in the UI is available in 10.2.2. Okay? So let me open up command prompt real quick. So the DCAdmin command line tool is found in your Cognos installation directory bin folder if you're a 32-bit installation, or bin 64 for 64-bit installations here. And oops, that's a lot of stuff I meant to do. So it comes in 2 flavors, a bat file for Windows and a shell script file for your Unix environments. Okay, so I'm just going to run the DCAdmin tool just without any parameters, and by doing that you'll see the help and usage information for this command line tool right here. So when you run this command line tool, all the output is shown on the screen right here. You have the option to save the output, any of this output from the tool, to an XML file with the -x and then specify an output file. This could be helpful if you have an ETL script or something like that where you want to run a command, get the output, parse the output a little bit, and then do different actions based on that output. Okay. Also, once the command is complete, it will return exit codes of 0 for successful command and 1 if there was an error. Okay. So these are all the different actions and all the different commands. Most of the actions that are available in Cognos Administration are available here through this command line tool as well. You can get the cube state, get the metrics, start and stop cubes, pause cubes, as well as incrementally load cubes, and so forth. So most of those actions are available through this command line tool as well. So let me show you how it's done. Let's first start by stopping the cube. And because I don't trust myself to type here, I'm going to open up a text file that has some commands already ready for me. Okay, so let's first start by, let's stop the cube, stop the running cube that we have right now. And basically it's running the DCAdmin batch file. We're going to pass in some login information, and then force stop cubes is the action and the cube name. That's going to stop the cube, and you'll see the output for this command shown right here in the command window when it has stopped running here. Okay, so it succeeded, and I'll just double check here just to show you that it did stop the cube. It is unavailable, and it is actually stopped. Okay, so it did work. Let's go ahead and start that cube again. Actually, I take it back. Let's get this cube state. What I just did in the admin UI, you can do here as well as in the command line. I'm running the command to get cube state for the cube, and this should return saying that the cube is indeed stopped. Here it is, cube state, cube stopped. All right, let's start that cube. In this case, I'm running the command with only one cube. You can pass multiple cubes here. As you can see here, that is still an option. You can pass a set of cubes for which you want the command to be run against. So right now we're starting the cube up with the start cubes command, and I'm passing it sales nrt cube. All right, and let's take a look at the cube metrics, like as if we were to do if we were in the Cognos Administration portal. You know, after you start the cube, you want to take a look at the cube metrics. We're in the command here to get cube metrics. It should be the exact same information you would see in the portal itself. So here's the list of metrics. Cube state is running great. The time last near real-time update available, that's the date there. And then the value of the last near real-time TID is 6. Remember, we updated our fact tables up to 6, and when we restarted the cube, it did a max query to find the latest TID. It is indeed 6, and so that's what the cube is up to at this point. So the TID value is 6, and just to show you, these are the same values that you do see in the admin portal as well. So 6 here, and it's running all good. That's that. I'll run the report real quick to show you what the values look like for TID value 6. While that's going up, so TID value 6 is 924,000 something. So let's add more rows to the fact table. So I'm doing a lot of things serially, but a lot of this can happen, you know, in parallel. You don't have to wait for each other. So let's add more rows to the fact table. I'm slowing it down so you can see the little impact of all these little updates. So we'll add rows for TID values 7, 8, and 9. Just real quick. Now it's up to 7, 8, and 9. Let's do an incremental update using the command line stuff. So first, let's get the cube metrics. Actually, we already got the cube metrics. We saw that it is up to 6, right? Let's do an incremental update up to a specific TID. As I mentioned earlier, the only way you can update your cube up to specific TIDs using DCAdmin command line tool. If we were to do it through the Cognos Administration UI, it would do a max query and get the latest, but you have more control using the command line tool. You can actually update it to a specific transaction ID. So I'll use this command here, running the incrementally load cubes action command with arguments of transaction ID of 8. So although we've updated our fact table with TID 7, 8, and 9, we'll choose to update the cube only up to transaction ID number 8. It's updated. Let's get the cube metrics and double check to see what it is set at, what the cube thinks the latest transaction ID is. Great, and here are the metrics. The latest TID value is 8 because that's what I said. I only wanted up to 8. And time to apply the last updates only took about a second to do. I'll run the report, show you that it got updated. And you can do the same kind of incremental update, for your cubes up to the latest, and not specifying that argument, just specify incremental load cubes, very similar to what you would do in the Cognos Admin UI. And this will automatically update the caches up to the latest TID, which is 9. So at 8, it's 953. And I'm going to run the command again to get the metrics real quick, see what it did. All right, and the TID value is 9, and it took about a second to update. And if I run this report one more time, you'll see that the values are updated to TID value 9, which is larger than it was before, 967,000. Okay, and that's it. And that's all I had to show here. I know I kind of went through it a little bit quickly here, but that gives you an overview, quick flavor of that workflow you would go through when working with near real-time updates, incremental updates for your cube, and taking advantage of that new feature that's available in 10.2.1, 6.3, as well as 10.2.2.